from that point on, we loved the Eden Isle. And then when Lisa and I met at Harding, we had, like, our social clubs would have events at the Red Apple Inn, and so we would go to those, and then later in the 80s, actually, and I think it was 87, Lisa was pregnant with Taylor, and we actually, the condo that they own now, we stayed in. It was on the rental plan. We stayed there, and we loved it, and it was for sale at the same time. They said, well, they were about to retire, and so I think Lisa and I really encouraged them, you know, this is a great place to retire to. And, you know, if you would have told them, look, you're going to have 30 good years here, I mean, you'd sell for that in a minute, but it's hard to believe that 30 years have passed, and I guess the older you get, the faster time goes on. But Dad was a very quiet person, and he wasn't one to speak in groups or lead group discussions or whatever, but if you knew him, if you were a friend, maybe even a new friend, or a small group, I mean, he was very loquacious, very talkative. And I want to say that I think if he was speaking today, that he would say that I want to thank God, and he was baptized at the age of 16 in Flat Lake in Noble, Arkansas, where he grew up, and he attended church, Sixth and Israel Church of Christ, when we were living in North Little Rock, and later at the Heber Springs Church of Christ once they moved up here. But Dad was very quiet in large gatherings, and I think he would say, if he was able to speak today, thank you, God, for allowing me to live 94 years, and 94 pretty healthy years, except for the last few months. And he had very little pain. I'd asked Dad if he had pain, and he said no. And he had very little pain up until the last maybe 6 months of his life. The second thing I think he would say is, you know, thank goodness I married the right woman. You know, maybe she's the only woman that would put up with him. You know? For that many years, for 69 years, they were their anniversary was June 17th, and like the story was already told, Esther Pipkin came and visited him in December, and she was witnessing my mom heat Dad's breakfast plate. And then she's going, well, what are you doing? You know, this doesn't happen at the Ritz-Carlton. This doesn't happen at the Four Seasons. You know, we got heated coffee cup and breakfast plate. You know? So, but anyway, that's what Dad expected, and that's what Mom provided for so many years. And I think that he would say, thank you for all the things that you've done. And unfortunately, she's not able to be here today. She's in Unity Hospital. But also, I think he would thank his daughter that he didn't have, Lisa, my wife, for all the things that she has done and all the visits. And it was like, I'm the only child. Why? I don't know. ever did ask that question? But Lisa truly was like the second child and his favorite daughter-in-law. Also, I think Dad would like to thank those that lived close to him there on the Eden Isle for all the gestures, all the kind gestures that were done. I know David DePoyster and David actually walked in one Sunday afternoon, and he would go over there commonly to talk with Dad. And Dad had this rash on his back, and he was going, let me look at it. So he looked at it, and it was like shingles. I mean, it was the worst case that he'd ever seen. And he took him to Cleveland County Hospital, and it was the worst case they'd ever seen. And but he asked him to give him this medication or whatever, and Dad thankfully didn't have a lot of pain from it. But also, I want to thank Jack and Betty Gentry, and I think my dad would. They were there on the cove early, and then they moved to a house a little bit later and up on the hill. And they brought food to Mom and Dad so many times, as did Bill and Glory Herring, who lived next door later, and their visits to Mom and Dad at the crossings. And then also Jeff and Chris Kaser. And I got a little story to tell about Jeff. Jeff is a Yankee too, you know. Dad, sometimes Dad uses the D word for a Yankee. Not always. And so it was the first time I had met Jeff. So Jeff was like new to Shady Cove. And Mom and Dad have been there like 30 years now, but I mean, they're long-time residents of Shady Cove. But anyway, Jeff was a new resident. And so Dad is sitting there in the living room, and he goes, son, do you know where Jeff's from? No, I don't. He's from Chicago. He said, you know, that's the last place on earth I'd want to live. And I'm thinking he could have said Beirut or Aleppo, or Magnum 1, 2, or Chicago 3. But you know, what a way to meet your new neighbor. And I'm like, but anyway, they became the best of friends. And Jeff, thanks to Jeff, I mean, Shady Cove condominiums, right now are the best looking aesthetically that they've ever looked. The landscaping and so forth, he's done so much. And thank you, Jeff and Chris, and they've been special friends for Mom and Dad. But as Taylor mentioned, Arkansas, there's no better state than Arkansas. Arkansas is number one. Now, Yahoo, Google, they got it all wrong. You Google this, they're 48th, 49th. No, that's not really true. Arkansas has the cleanest water. It has the purest air. It has the best trout fishing. And Taylor and I fished on the Snake River out west. And Dad would always say, well, the Red River's so much better. You get so much bigger trout. The fly fishing is so much better on the Red River. And it probably is, because we used to catch small ones and not big ones. And Dad would also be thankful that he was able to wade the Red River until he was 87 years old in waders. And one day he called me, I'll never forget, he said, son, he says, I think I'm through trout fishing by myself. And I think he was afraid he was going to slip and fall and be washed down the river when he started generating, which was a definite possibility. But as Taylor mentioned, his driving lessons, Dad, the one thing that Arkansas, and I got to mention this, Arkansas Razorbacks were number one no matter what. The football team, which had won a national championship since '64, and that was a shared national championship. The basketball team, which hadn't won a national championship since '94. The baseball team came within one catch of winning a national championship last year, but they were all the ways the best. And if they weren't the best, Arkansas State was the best. And if they weren't the best, Harding University, Bisons were the best. It was always the Arkansas team: basketball, baseball, football, didn't matter. But the one thing that Dad did not like was Arkansas drivers. And he would talk to the grandchildren, talk to me. He says, he said, I've been to Miami, but Arkansas drivers are worse than Miami. And he would state this statistic, which this is kind of scary, that more people, when the automobile hit the roadway, which had been early 1900s, to present that there have been more people killed on America's highways and more pedestrians killed than all of the servicemen that we have lost in all the wars since that time, and all of the murders in the United States. And I think Dad wanted me to say that. And it's really a staggering statistic. And he said, society may look back 50 or 100 years from now and say, how did we allow that carnage? How did we justify that carnage? But that was one thing that Dad, if you were around him very, very much, that was one thing that he really, really emphasized. But he was probably, he self-proclaimed best driver in the world. He started driving at 13. He drove his dad's log trucks and had no license. And then he drove up until December. So he drove for 80 years. He had one accident. He called them wrecks because you don't have accidents. It was caused by one person. So he had one wreck. It was on a winter day in Little Rock, and somebody ran a stop sign, and it was a snowy day. He couldn't stop, and he turned his wheel, and so it was kind of a glancing blow, but that was his only wreck. And so he had a great record. And the last ticket he got, I guarantee it was the last millennium. It was not recent. But as Taylor, as Daisha, as Bill mentioned, Dad loved family. And for 30 years, Mom and Dad were able to come down to Miami for 30 years straight. The last several years, Taylor and Rosa escorted him because it was difficult to get on the plane, on and off the plane. And then there were the 4th of July, which we celebrated at the river for over 30 years as well. And Dad was a very family person. They had a very close relationship, Mom and Dad did, with Jack and Maxine Wishart, Lisa's parents. And Dad was born on May 2nd, 25. Jack was born on May 12th, 25. So Jack always felt better because he was younger at that time. But both their families were in the timber business. Both were named Jack. Both were from, Jack Wishart was from Marion County, Florida, and my dad, Jack's family, was from Marion County, Arkansas. There were so many similarities. It was amazing. And politically, philosophically, identical. Just incredibly. So they had so many great times together. But I was fortunate to have Dad as a father, and he came to every baseball game I ever had, every football game I ever had, every piano recital I ever had, Mom and Dad came to. And so I don't think that, I got to spend so many times with them the last, particularly 7 to 10 years. I would usually come once a month or a couple of times a month. And Dad and I shared so many things together, and I was trying to think of things that we maybe missed talking about. Well, we talked about pretty much everything that we wanted to talk about, including Bill alluded to this book that Dad read called Rising Tide, and it was written about the flood of 1927. And Dad's family moved from Noble, Arkansas to Mississippi in 1927 at about the time of the flood, and Dad thinks he recalls remembering 1927. I said, Dad, you're 2 years old, I don't remember anything, maybe 3.5, 4, but not 2, But he thought he remembered, and they came to Mississippi at the absolute wrong time. His dad lost all his money, and they had to move back to Northeast Arkansas. And but he enjoyed reading that book, Rising Tide. It was so ironic this year that you had the floods in Arkansas, and you had a lot of the similarities of what occurred in 1927. The floods in Oklahoma and Kansas that flooded the Arkansas River, that flooded the White River, that didn't allow a lot of the farmers to plant in Arkansas. But in 1927, it really transformed Arkansas. Arkansas used to have 7 representatives in the United States Congress. Only has 4 now, and the population declined a lot because of that particular incident, and over 1 million acres of land were flooded in Arkansas. But in closing, I want to thank everybody that's come to the crossings to visit Mom and Dad, and the Kynells, the Minihams, and I'm sure I've overlooked a number of people. But I know that Dad would want to thank everybody for coming to visit. And in closing, I would like to say that Dad, and I've got a video that's going to be played here in a couple of minutes, but Dad was a Southerner. And like I said, sometimes he used the D word in front of Yankee. But he was almost from a border state. He was from Northeast Arkansas. He was from Clay County, which is very close to Missouri, which was a border state during the war between the states. You don't call it the Civil War, you call it or the cause. And favorite movie was Gone with the Wind. And mentioned the old mill. I think Kale mentioned the old mill, which is an opening scene of Gone with the Wind, and Dad would point that out in a heartbeat. But Dad loved the South. In fact, he loved it so much that in 1959, I couldn't believe this, in 1959, he told me this later, he went to see Walter Williams, who was laying in state in rest in Houston, Texas, where he died, supposedly at that time the oldest living Confederate soldier that kind of closed the books on the Confederacy. And Dad went to stand in line, and you actually YouTube it. You can look at and Dad's probably somewhere. I didn't see the picture there. I did, but he was there. And so vacations for us, for me, was like, we're going to Natchez, we're going to Vicksburg, we're going to Shiloh, we're going to Richmond, or we might take a break, go to Bellingraph Gardens or New Orleans. But it was somewhere in the South, and it was somewhere centered around the cause. We might go to Jefferson Davis's home, which I think was Mobile. But Dad had this affinity to the South, which was almost unexplainable. But yet he fought, he actually didn't go overseas, but he was a pilot that dropped parachuters here in the United States and was about to go over before World War II ended, but he entered at the age of 18 and flew until he was 20, until the war was over and was about to go over. But his dad fought in France in World War I, and my mom's dad fought in France in the trenches in World War I. And he was gassed with mustard gas and lost one of his lungs. And I wonder how he survived the trip back over. I'm sure it was on a boat. After reading The Pandemic of 1918 and how many people were killed worldwide. Some countries in Asia and also Africa lost 10% of their population due to the pandemic of 1918. But he survived somehow or another. And he is buried in Mississippi, and on his tombstone reads, "They gave their today for our tomorrow." And I would like to leave that thought and then play the video.